Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack here. Wednesday now, the 31st of July, last day of the month of July, 2024. Good to have you with me. We've got a lot to talk about today. The East Pacific really starting to light up now. We've got TD number 3E, E of course for Eastern Pacific. And in the Atlantic Basin, we do have this new area we're going to have to be watching very closely, as it looks like we could have some trouble with it in and around Florida, perhaps. Some of the modeling is starting to change. Those GFS runs that everybody were saying were all wacky, maybe not so much. So let's dive in and see what we've got. First of all, in the East Pac, don't have to worry about this area at all. Honestly, we don't have to worry about any of these areas for direct impacts to land, but we do have a new tropical depression here that is forecast to become the first hurricane of the Eastern Pacific season, and then a new area that looks like it is a shoe-in to develop in the southeastern Pacific if we expand this out to the next 7 days. At least from the graphical tropical weather outlook perspective, there you have everything. So let's take a look at the TD3E, first of all, satellite imagery there. Starting to come together well south of the Mexican coastline. You can see these positionings here. And then this is some of the model information away from Mexico, so that is certainly great news for our friends down there. All the ensembles are generally showing that. No turn up towards the desert southwest, the Baja, any of that. So no concerns from that perspective. This is what it looks like on our interactive tracking map. And again, I really want to emphasize no concerns at all down here along the Mexican coastline. And that includes the Baja. It is forecast to become a Category 1 out here. It might do so a little bit earlier, and it'll add a few ACE points to the Eastern Pacific Accumulated Cyclone Energy. That's what ACE means. It'll add some ACE points to the scorecard. And that's about it. We can see it on the satellite imagery here this afternoon. There's our depression. Again, well south and west of the Mexican coastline. This is the other area of disturbed weather. All of this activity should move off away from land areas, so I can't keep emphasizing it enough. Great news for Mexico, especially for people in Acapulco who don't need a hurricane anywhere near their area for at least a generation or more, I can assure you. By the way, look at the southwest monsoon moisture trying to gather once again this afternoon. Most of the rest of the west, outside of the terrible fires that are happening out that way, nice and clear, very hot and dry. Our next area to watch, of course, is this right here. So far, not an invest area, but it's not going to be long. I think, what are we up to, 97L or something like that? Maybe off by one. Maybe it's 96L, I don't know. But it's not designated just yet. But it's not going to be long. Look at where we were yesterday when it was just a little area of energy out here, and it was barely detectable in terms of thunderstorms. And today, they have definitely begun to increase, and that helps to get that vorticity signature going. And it's just the process. It takes a while. The dry air, definitely very prevalent out here. But once you get in the vicinity of the islands over here, the dry air, not as much of an issue. Thermodynamics are better. And we are getting some pop-up showers and thunderstorms as this tropical wave moves through. A little bit rainy down here in parts of the Northeast Caribbean, including the Virgin Islands. Nothing terrible, not too much flooding rain, but kind of unsettled nevertheless. Here it is, starting to look a little bit better on the vorticity signature perspective, if I can get it to pop up there. This product from the University of Wisconsin, their Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies. And there it is, starting to come together just a little bit now in that area between Puerto Rico. I mean, basically, it's right over the Virgin Islands and the islands nearby. They don't show up too well here. This is not a high-resolution map. But there is that energy starting to gather. And the question is, if it develops early, is it going to just kind of do this deal and try to head out into the open Atlantic? If it develops later, gets tangled up through the Antilles through here, could it make its way into the Gulf and be a bigger problem, mainly as a just terrible rainmaker? Lots and lots of heavy rain possible with this. We're starting to see some changes in the guidance, and that is reflected from a lot of people out on social media. I'll show you Dylan Federico's point of view here today. He said he's not sold on the Atlantic wave tracking east of Florida. That is the scenario that the Euro has favored the most as of late. The GFS has been fairly insistent that this would come into the Gulf one way or another, and now we're starting to see some evidence that that could indeed happen, and Dylan points that out. Recent runs of the Euro ensemble have trended west with a handful of members shifting into the Gulf. And Dylan makes a good point here, just very matter of fact. Interest in the southeast U.S., the Gulf Coast, must closely monitor the progress of this disturbance. And I'm going to come on and remind you, it is not always about whether or not this becomes a hurricane and then what category is it. You need to be thinking impacts to your boating plans, impacts to your cruise plans, travel plans, airline, you name it, and beach-going activities. There could be rip currents, there could be thunderstorms, there could be gusty winds, maybe where there's onshore flow, eventually some storm surge problems. You got to think about the whole picture, not just tunnel vision focusing on, it's not a hurricane, who cares? A lot of people sort of see it that way, and they end up getting surprised, and they have a lot of problems. So you have to understand what we're looking at here in the bigger scheme of things, not just whether or not, again, it's going to become a hurricane. That's not always the point. So looking at the modeling, this is the GFS from the 12Z run today. Let's use this sort of reddish color to highlight everything. 12Z initialization, basically 8 a.m. Eastern time. There's the wave. You can clearly see the wave there, the energy, and those little yellow areas through here, still spread out, but that is that relative cyclonic vorticity that we talk about. I guess I'll use blue to make it pop better. Wave axis probably coming right through here, something like that. And then there's the curvature of everything. It's starting to consolidate. So let's see what the old GFS is up to this time around on the 12Z run. Move this out frame by frame. That energy moves through the greater Antilles over the next couple of days. And then what's interesting to me, watch this little piece of energy right here, just to the north of the Haitian Peninsula. All this mountainous terrain in here certainly is going to disrupt anything from trying to consolidate. But I think it's interesting on this run of the GFS, there is a little piece of energy right there. Watch how that evolves over time, comes through Cuba, gets into the Florida Straits, and then finally into the Gulf of Mexico, where it tries to consolidate Sunday afternoon just to the west of Tampa, and then finally up into the Big Bend area. But this is 5 days out. It just kind of mills around down here, and this is where we could start to see some really big problems with a lot of heavy rain in Florida. And it could be 100 miles more west, it could be 100 miles more east. We're almost at a week out, and you know how it is. A week out, we don't know, right? We don't even know 3 days out sometimes. Heck, even 24 hours out, especially intensity-wise, there's a lot of guesswork. So let's rewind the clock, see how this evolves to get there. The Euro and its ensembles are showing a similar fate with this system now, to some extent. So we're going to have to watch this, especially as the steering pattern breaks down, leaving this system to mill around over very warm water. Wait until I show you that. That is going to be my big concern, is the amount of just flooding rain that this could bring to an area, multiple areas of Florida. So here's the Euro out to 6 days. Let's refresh this. We should get the 7-day on the EC Fast, as Dr. Cowan has labeled it on the Tropical Tidbit site. So there's our disturbance right there, just to get your eyes focused on what we're watching. That's it right there that I've scribbled over with blue. This is every 24 hours. So this is Thursday morning, Friday morning, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, Monday, Tuesday, and then finally day 7, Wednesday. A very similar setup to what the GFS is showing. So if I'm in Florida, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, man, we could get a lot of heavy rain, a lot of inclement weather. You've got all the coastal areas, you've got the inland highway systems, you've got the resort areas, right? You have to think about this in terms of impacts. And when we see that as broad as it is on both of the models, forget intensity in terms of pressure and wind. Think of intensity in terms of the potential for flooding. And a big reason why I'm extra concerned is this right here. Water temperatures around the west coast of Florida, 31 Celsius. I have never seen, and this is not hyperbolic at all. For those of you, you can go back. What do they say? The kids these days, I've got the receipts. If you had the time and you could go back and look at my videos, I'm telling you, I've never seen 31 Celsius this widespread all around Florida like that. And if I have, well, I'm just getting old and I forgot. I just don't recall there being that massive an area of 31 Celsius. We're talking almost 90 degrees, 88, 89 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is a lot of extra energy and moisture. The precipitable water values are going to just be off the charts probably. And we're going to have to be watching this very closely because, again, forget the overall intensity possibilities. You got to scrub that out of your mind and think from what I just showed you. We could be talking about an excessive rainfall problem down in a big area of Florida as this thing just kind of mills around, kind of getting stuck in the pattern overall. A new kind of scenario starting to take shape here. We're going to have to see how this evolves. And who knows? This is all happening 5, 6, 7 days out. Things could change even more as we go forward, so keep that in mind as well. A complicated setup, to be sure. Very warm in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, it is a lot warmer, and I will say a lot. It is a lot warmer than it should be. Some of these anomalies now 2 and 3 degrees Celsius. Doesn't sound like a lot to you and I, probably just from a very basic standpoint. 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, dude, who cares? Trust me, that is a lot of extra energy stored in the water. We call that latent heat, and is just waiting to be tapped, and this could lead to a big rain event. Even to the east of Florida, nothing but warm water for something like this to tap into, to dump excessive amounts of rain. And if it were to stay out over water longer and become stronger, well, that's something else we'll worry about later on. Right now, though, I'm seeing this as a big rain possibility down the road. All right, so real quick before we wrap things up, 20 years ago today, the early team of the HurricaneTrack field crew had come up with this idea of the Hurricane Landfall Project, where we wanted to study tropical cyclones at landfall, eventually using remote cams of some kind. And in 2004, the idea was to take our old Isuzu Rodeo, my very first chase vehicle. You don't really chase hurricanes, you intercept them, but that doesn't sound nearly as sexy as hurricane chasing, right? Nevertheless, that was the idea. Take the old Isuzu Rodeo that I had. I bought it in 1999. And by 2003, we had the Chevy Tahoe that looked like something out of a movie with all the stuff on it. You guys have probably seen pictures of it. You remember that old Tahoe. So in 2004, we were moving towards this idea of turning the Isuzu into a sort of remote test dummy kind of deal that would be loaded with instruments, weather station stuff, and cameras. Mount cameras all over. We didn't have GoPros back in 2004, so we had to figure all of that out ourselves. And it started with this advisory here on July 31st, 20 years ago, for what would become Hurricane Alex. It was the first, it's hard to believe it was the first of such a big season, right? The first tropical depression of 2004 didn't happen until all the way at the end of July. And it would go on. This is the first graphic for it, the first forecast outlook. It would go on to become a hurricane, and we were ready. Myself, my colleague Jesse Bass from Southeast Virginia, and our other colleague from the Storm Study Project, John Van Pelt, who unfortunately passed away a little bit more than a year ago, I think January of 23. So he's no longer with us, but the three of us were going to head out to somewhere along the Outer Banks and intercept this system, leading up to just about 10 days later, what would be an infamous day with Hurricane Charlie. So I'm going to kind of go back and chart this piece by piece over the next several days at the end of these updates, kind of retelling history a little bit, because it's been 20 years now since we started what we now have as just an amazing field project to study, observe, report, you name it. Tropical cyclones, other severe weather. We're now studying hail. Been out to the desert southwest for the monsoon. Nor'easters up in the northeast United States, of course. Lake effect snow events. Even atmospheric river stuff in California back in 2023. All of that had its beginnings 20 years ago with the start of the Hurricane Landfall Project. So tomorrow, we're just going to kind of go back and look at it day by day as if it was happening in real time, at least just looking at some of the forecast information as Alex evolved and we got eventually towards our trip to the Outer Banks. I'll show you some pictures off of Jesse's website and a couple of videos in a couple of days. It wasn't until I think August 3rd that it finally made landfall. All right, well, that is it from me for today. Again, I'm on vacation with the family doing some cool stuff with them. before I'm probably going to be immersed in the weather for weeks at a time. Who knows, maybe this will be the trigger for it. We'll see. Hopefully I can get away with having to worry about it for the next several days, but hope is not a planning tool. I'll have to make plans to get off vacation if I need to, but hopefully that won't happen. All right, anyway, you guys have a good rest of your last day of July. As all of us from Hurricane Track say, we thank you, appreciate you watching. I'm Mark Sudduth. I'll see you again tomorrow.